Hello everyone. Once again, welcome to the guidance and counseling class. I hope all of you are fine. In the previous videos, we were discussed about the counseling, the introduction about counseling, the principles of counseling, and differences between guidance and counseling. Let's move on to the another concept, that is approaches of counseling. Okay, let's discuss what are the approaches of counseling. Yes, introduction. What are the approaches? Sometimes we can say approaches are nothing but methods of counseling or way of counseling. Methods are nothing but way of the procedure we are going to adapt while counsel. And apart from that, sometimes we can say types of counseling. So the different approaches to counseling are based on the varying conceptions of human personality structure and dynamics, and are the subject to the limitations to which the personality theories are prone. The term approach is used in preference to theory, as no single theory has yet been able to encompass all the aspects of counseling. Based on the nature of the counseling process and the role of the counselor, the following are the three types of counseling, or we can say three approaches. Approach, the way we are adapting the procedure, nothing but how we are, the mode of what we can say, the mode of the counseling we are providing to the counsel. The based on that, we are having three types of counseling, nothing but approaches of counseling or mode of counseling we can say. They are directive counseling, non-directive counseling, and eclectic counseling. Today we are going to discuss one of the approach, that is directive counseling. What is directive counseling? It's very important how it is. So this is one method you can adopt depending upon the situation, how you are going to give the counseling at your school level as well as in the colleges, isn't it? So this is the one method you can adopt. Directive counseling. So the chief exponent of directive counseling, B.G. Williamson. B.G. Williamson. So many of them contributed in theoretical concept of directive counseling approach developed by different experts, psychologists, so many of them. Sigmund Freud also given contributed in with related to the directive counseling concept also. So, but chief exponent, we are usually taking the name B.G. Williamson as chief exponent of the directive counseling. The counselor assumes the major responsibility of solving the problem. Directive counseling, so this is one of the characteristics of the directive counseling. Counselor assumes the major responsibility. That means this is counselor oriented. That's why we are taking, because he is taking completely the responsibility here to solve the problems of a client. Counselor identifies, defines, diagnoses, and provides solutions to the problem. That's why it is counselor centered. So everything, because what are the responsibilities he takes? He identifies the problem of an individual, may not be students or person. Identify why he is having such type of problems. So the counselor has taken initiation to identify all those problems and defines and diagnoses and provides a solution to the problem. So in the directive counseling, counselor directs thinking by informing, uh, explaining, interpreting, and advising. Yes, this is related to the directive counseling. So that's why it is called as a counselor oriented, because the everything it is done by counselor, but client has to be followed. So whatever the counselor gives the directions, that's why the name itself directive. Directive means giving directions from the counselor to the counselee. That's why it is called as directive counseling. That's why it is counselor oriented. So the aspects it is circulated with the counselor only. Emphasis on the problem, not on the client or counseling. So in the directive counseling, so the emphasis on the problem but not on, it focuses more on a an individual. So that is one of the key feature of directive counseling. One must has to adopt this one. That is one of the approach of counseling. Directive approach concept. What actually it is? The authoritarian point of view is largely associated with the work of Sigmund Freud. According to the client is ignorant and unaware of the reason for his difficulties or suffering which are deeply embedded in the unconscious. The client is therefore helpless and it is the therapist who has to play the role of interpreting the material for him or her. Yes, the psychological difficulties, according to the psychoanalysis, are explained as phenomena that are strictly psychologically determined. This principle is known as psychological determinism. So, this is actually a concept given by Sigmund Freud, directive psychoanalytic theory based on. So, he has proposed the directive counseling approach. So we can give the directions how they are going to understand, how they can try out the some measures to overcome the problems like that. They can give the directions. Process of directive approach. As the name itself implies, this approach envisages a more active roles for the counselor. The counselor employs varying degrees of directions to help the counselee to reach sound solutions. As the name itself implies, this approach envisages a more active role for the counselor. Counselor employs varying degrees of directions to help the counselor to reach sound solutions. Also, through his own specialized knowledge and experience in scientific diagnosis and interpretation of the data, counselees are helped to reach earlier solution for their problems. According to Frederick Thorney, the proponent of this approach, the need for direction by the counselor is inversely proportional to the individual counselee's potentialities for self-regulation. Inversely proportional to the individual counselee's potentialities. That means the counselor is having a main role here. He is having an active person here rather than compared to the individual. Though the basic responsibility for reaching the solution is primarily with the counselor as the counseling proceeds. Yes, of course, as the counseling proceeds. Counselees are encouraged more and more to take up increased responsibility for self-direction. This approach presupposes a more personalized relation with the counselee, where the counselor strives to identify psychologically with the counselee so that he can be understood better. This is actually the procedure how it moves from counselor to the counselee. Let's move on to the steps, what we can say, or stages we can say. Counseling steps. When we are adapted directive approach of counseling, it has to follow systematically. This approach having its own systematic procedure or nothing but the stages or we can say steps of directive approach of counseling. So it is having 6 stages. They are like this. The first one it is analysis. This involves collection from various sources the data needed for an adequate understanding of the client. This includes administration of psychological tests, etc. However, such testing and form filling should not come between the counselor and counselee, and its importance should be limited to the extent that it gives a better idea about their counselee. Yes, it is very important step. Before providing a measures or solutions to the problem through the counseling process, the counselor must analyze the individual by collecting a data with regarding to the different aspects of an individual, like maybe it depends upon the what type of the problem he is having. So that's why analysis is very important. How we are analyzing? Before that, you have to collect a data, you have to analyze a data so that you can came to know that root cause of all those things. That is very important. Analyze the data by administering different types of tools and techniques of guidance and counseling. They are called as non-testing devices and testing devices. Yes, counseling steps. First one is analysis. We have to analyze the data by collecting from different tools and techniques of guidance and counseling. IQ test, personality test, adjustment inventory, interest inventory, case study, through the observation. From the different sources we have to collect. Later then we can interpret those data. The second step it is synthesis. This refers to summarizing and organizing the data so obtained as to reveal the assets, liabilities, adjustment and maladjustments of the counselee. This includes of the data obtained through the psychological testing also. After analysis we have to synthesize. Synthesize means we can list out with related to the personality of an individual, like what are the interests he is having, what are his likes, dislikes, strengths and weaknesses, and what are the other problems if he is having the counseling. So all these can be done after analysis of the collected data. That is nothing but synthesis process. This is very important step. How well you are synthesizing with regarding to the personality of a student, you can come to know what actually the problems, what is facing, and what are the capabilities, inborn capabilities he is having. When you came to know that, then it is possible to provide a relevant measures through the counseling process. Okay, these are the first two steps. How well you are doing these two steps, then it is helping you to provide a suitable counseling. But you have, as a beginner, it is not possible. You must get a skill how to collect data and how to synthesize all those things. Very important. The teacher or counselor, you are going to become a counselor, you must develop these skills. These are all very important skills. Okay, next going to the diagnosis. This stage is concerned with formulating conclusions regarding the nature and the course of the problems exhibited by the student or a counselee. Drawing conclusions from the results of psychological testing, administration of questionnaires, etc. are done here. So you are going to diagnose. Diagnose means you are going to be finding out what is the root cause on the basis of the synthesis of the collected data, isn't it? After analysis, you have to synthesize the data. Later, you have to diagnose based on the synthesis what you have find out. That is most important. Diagnosing means you are checking out what is the root cause for the present problem. So because in the beginning only have explained about one of the principle of guidance, that is all the problems are interrelated. So this is one we have to keep in our mind. So if the child is academically poor achiever, then it may not be implicates or implies he is not studying well, or is not attentive, or is IQ is poor. Maybe the so many other reasons are interrelated. So that's why he is exhibiting poor academic performance. That is only the observable behavior we can see. But what is the root cause for that? When we are identifying such things, then only it is possible to provide a suitable solution for the problems. So that is most important thing. That's why the counselor has to follow systematic procedure before going to give just an advice. It's not an advice, it's a systematic procedure. We have to give a suitable and relevant solutions for their problems. So that's why diagnosis is very important. How the doctors diagnose the patients, like that they are sending the uh, samples of the patients to the lab, then only it is possible to identify what type of the fever is he or she is having. Then only they can recommend the suitable drugs, otherwise it is not possible. So like that here also So some psychological problems or educational problems, personal problems the students they are having, we have to diagnose properly, then find out the root cause for that, then we have to provide a suitable uh, counseling or solution for the problems, isn't it? That is a diagnosis. How you are diagnosing? So through the different sources, what you collected the data, after analysis and synthesis you will get out the root cause. So this is the third step. Okay, next move on to the fourth one, that is prognosis. This refers to the predicting the future course of the development of the counsel's problem in the light of conclusions are made earlier. Yes, if it is the problem the child is facing, how much the future prediction, how much it is going to be happen with the child or a student in the future. So it can be identified or it can be explained on the basis of the diagnosis what you did in the earlier stage. So that is also very important. So sometimes if the child is at the early stage telling keeps on lies, so if you are neglecting, he is a kid, okay, let it be. So is that possible okay with the child? No. So when we are so excusing a child or a student, it will when he grows, so he keeps on telling that one, so it will become a habit. So then it is really a big problem in future with regarding to the personality development of a student. With regarding to that, we can predict, that is what we call prognosis. This is actually what is the fourth step. It is very important. So the counselor has to understand very clearly about so the prediction of the future course of the development of the counsel's problem in the light of conclusions are made earlier. You can take an example of like that so many other psychological problems. I have explained in the earlier videos. This is one example I have given here. So that you can do it here. That is the fourth step. And the fifth one, it is counseling. Yes, after doing all those procedures, then you have to do counseling procedure. This is the most important and time consuming step in the whole process. This is where the expertise of the counselor is needed most. It is highly personalized teaching and learning process. It may be direct teaching through explicit explanations, assistance in searching for relevant aptitudes, interest, etc., that eliminate the counselor's problem, and so on. Sometimes the counselor listens in a friendly or encouraging way. It may also involve practice sessions where, with the warm support of the counselor, the counselee acts out the way he or she should. Yes, this is actually after analyzing, diagnosing, and keeping in the future predictions of that existence of the problem, the counselor has to direct and give solutions in these steps for the child, what type of the problems they are having. Thus, he or she becomes his or her own teacher to extend his or her capabilities and circumstances permits. Success thus achieved reinforces and retains those successful behaviors, which in turn establishes an adjusted way of life. That is the counseling process. The last one, it is follow up. Follow up helping with recurrence or new patterns. Yes, you have to check out whether what are the solutions or measures you are given to the child or a client, whether they are followed, whether they are worked out. You have to evaluate all those things and the follow up step. If one solution you are given, if it is not suitable for the another child also, so then you can try out for the new solution, help them to overcome their problems. You can give up. This is actually evaluation of the complete your counseling process or analysis of the earlier steps what you are the comes under the directive approach of counseling. That is analysis whether you did correctly or synthesizing of or you diagnosed properly, whether you have you did properly find out the root cause of the problem, and relevant measures have you given. So you have to check out and evaluate and find out the loopholes. If it is possible, then you can modify and give alternate solutions so that the client get the benefit of all these things. These are the 6 steps you have to systematically follow when you are providing directive approach of counseling. So these are the major steps. So then it will become effective. Okay, then next move on to the other aspect of directive counseling. Assumptions of directive counseling. Yes, directive counseling approach, it is based on the certain assumptions. According to Willie, the following can be the basic assumptions of directive counseling. You have to keep in your mind when you are adapted this approach. The first one, it is competency in giving advice. The counselor possesses the best training experience and information. He is more competent to provide an advice to the problem. Yes, of course. This is the fundamental assumption of direct counseling, because in the earlier slide I have explained directive counseling, it is a counselor oriented. That means he is having a complete responsibility. So he has to take all the initiations. So that's why he must be competent and well versed with the knowledge of psychology, child psychology, and importance of all these things, and he well versed with all the skills. So then only it is possible to provide a relevant counseling. So that's why it is said to be a competency in giving advice. The next assumption is that counseling as an intellectual process, and client's intellectual is not destroyed as a result of maladjustment. Hence, counseling is primarily an intellectual process. It stresses upon the intellectual aspects. It stresses upon the intellectual aspects of a person instead of emotional aspects of the personality. Yes, it is an intellectual process rather than emotional aspects. Next one, counseling objectives as problem solving situation. The counselor does not possess the capability for solving the problems always. That is another thing, he has to focus more on the counseling objectives rather than problem solving situation. Next, client's incapability of solving the process. The counselor does not possess the capability for solving the problem always. So whenever it is possible, better you have to help the individual so that they can solve themselves. These are the few assumptions they have to keep in their mind. So this is about a directive approach of counseling. Okay, next move on to the advantages of directive counseling. When you are adopted, what are the advantages you will get? This method is useful from the time consuming viewpoint. It saves time. Yes, of course, because you are not allowing a child or an individual so that they can come up with their own way finding the solutions for their problems, because everything it is fixed and prepared by the counselor. He acts like a mature person, so that he has to give directions to the individual. So that's why it saves the time. In this type of counseling, there is more focus on the problem and the person. Yes, here it is comparative to the client, that it is problem oriented. It is focuses more problem what child or a student is having rather than uh, about the client. The counselor can look the client directly. Yes, that is the thing. Counseling focuses more on the intellectual aspects of the person than emotional aspect of the personality. In this process, the counselor becomes readily available to help, which makes the client very happy. Yes, readily available to help, which makes the client very happy, because he doesn't have any responsibility to come up with his own problems. But counselor is has to take all the responsibility. That's why client will become very happy. Limitations also this is having. In this process, the client is more dependent. He is also less able to solve new problems of adjustment. Yes, this is one of the limitation of the directive counseling approach. As the client is never independent of the counselor, it is not an efficient best guidance. Yes, of course, because every walk of life, an individual faces the new problem. It's not like that. Once if you have solved your problem, very next day you not or later in your life you will not get a problems. It's not like that. So every walk of life we are having confusions, dilemmas, isn't it? And we are having yes, of course, so many things, and sometimes problems that we have to face and we have to be solve ourselves. That habit we have to cultivate. So that is most important. But through this counseling, it is not possible. Such type of habits cannot be developed among the students. So it is not an efficient best guidance unless and until person does not develop some attitude through experiences. He cannot make any decision himself. This is also one of the limitation of directive counseling. The counselor fails in serving the client to commit the mistakes in future. So this is also possibility. Commit the mistakes in future. That this is also one of the possibility if you are adopted directive counseling. That is a limitation of directive counseling. Even though some limitations or few limitations, it is also going to be useful because of it is also having some advantages. Depending upon the advantages, to overcome the limitations whenever it is necessary, that point the counselor has to think and use this approach depending upon the age group of the students, depending upon the nature of the problems the students they are having. Keeping all these things, they can select the appropriate method of counseling procedure. So this is about guidance and directive approach of this is about directive approach of counseling. In the later upcoming videos, I will move on to the another approaches of counseling. Directive means directional. There is nothing like that. Directional. It is counselor oriented directive approach. You can think here. So in different levels or what type of the problems you can solve by adapting this type of approach. And second question, what type of the age group you are preferably selecting, or when you are dealing with what type of the age group of the student you are using this approach, you can list out. ಮುಂದಿನ ವಿಡಿಯೋದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡೋಣ. ಸೊ ನೀವೊಂದಷ್ಟು ಪಟ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡಿ ಯಾವ ಏಜ್ ಗ್ರೂಪಿಗೆ ಈ ಮೆಥಡ್ ಸೂಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಮತ್ತು ಯಾವ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ಸಿಗೆ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಮೆಥಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಅಪ್ರೋಚನ್ನು ನಾವು ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಕೌನ್ಸಿಲಿಂಗ್ ಅಥವಾ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಅಪ್ರೋಚ್ ಆಫ್ ಕೌನ್ಸಿಲಿಂಗ್. ಸೊ ವೆನ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಯೂಸ್ಫುಲ್. ಸೊ ಇದು ನಿಮಗೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಐ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೈನ್ಡ್ steps, procedure, the nature of directive counseling, all these things. So keeping all those things, you can find out for which problems exactly it suits and what type of the age group of the students you can counsel through this approach. So this is an assignment. After watching this video, you have to list out and ಸೆಂಡ್ ಇಟ್ ಟು ಮೀ. ಅದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ ಆವಾಗ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ತದೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅನ್ನೋಂಥ ಅಂಶ ಅನ್ನೋಂಥದ್ದು. ಒಂದು ಸ್ಮಾಲ್ ಇದು ನಿಮಗೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ, ಇದು ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಲೈಕ್ ಎನ್ ಅಸೈನ್ಮೆಂಟ್. ಸೊ ಓಕೆ, ಐ ಹೋಪ್ ಆಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಯು ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟುಡ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ದ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಅಪ್ರೋಚ್ ಆಫ್ ಕೌನ್ಸಿಲಿಂಗ್. ಸೊ ದ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಅಪ್ಕಮಿಂಗ್ ವೀಡಿಯೋಸ್ I will discuss more about the remaining approaches or non-directive approach of counseling, and another one it is eclectic approach of counseling. Okay.